Hey everyone, Firegross here, and today we're going to be looking at each skill that got buffed and nerfed and how it affects various playstyles. Today's video isn't going to include any spreadsheets or anything like that. The entire point of this video is to be able to show you guys at a glance whether your skill got buffed or nerfed. So basically, every time we mention mines, we're talking about high impact mines. Blast chain mines are usually within 3% of that value. Whenever we mention traps, we're assuming that you're using trap support and multiple trap support. And we're also going to approximate trap support's 38% increased damage as 5% more damage. This was pretty close to a lot of the calculations I did, so we're just going to use that for everything. Now, all the values are rounded to the nearest whole number. That means we're sometimes rounding up, rounding down. I don't want to include decimal places in all these values and stuff, and that's just so that it's very easy to read, especially if you're not someone who appreciates math and all that. Redundant playstyles have been excluded, so I'm not going to include every permutation of every skill with every type of trigger. We're just going to look at the things that I've seen or heard of people play. Now, every time we list cast on crit, it's going to be awakened cast on crit, but normal cast on crit is usually about 3% less DPS. And totems are going to assume that previously you had 6 totems, that you were using multiple totem support, and that you're losing 1 with the Soul Mantle nerf, and now using 5. First up is Explosive Arrow, and the reason we're talking about this is because I think this is going to be the big thing next league. So Explosive Arrow was already being prepared by Crouching Tuna and Palstron as a league starter next league, and it's been on a lot of other people's radars, and today GGG announced basically a buff for it. So they're nerfing base Ignite, but then giving Explosive Arrow additional ignite damage per arrow on the target. Now, at a league starter level, you're usually getting 10 to 12 arrows, which means you're going to have a small buff, but at the high end, where you have enough hit rate to get all 20 arrows onto a boss, that's a 44% buff to your ignite damage, which is the main way to play this. You're playing an Explosive Arrow ignite ballistas, basically. This is insane. A lot of people are already doing above wave 25 Simulacrum with like around 20x investment. Crouching Tuna on stream the other day did wave 28 with, I believe, so was Self-Found gear pretty much. So to buff it at the high end is just insane. This is going to be like S++++ league starter, I think. It's also fairly tanky build as well, which is uncharacteristic for bows. So it's the whole package. The only weakness is really like the clear speed is a little lacking, but it's going to have very great boss killing potential, and you can pretty much play it with only rares. You don't even need uniques to get this going. This is easily going to put out close to 2 million damage without very many uniques at all. So, and then you can easily scale it up past like 10, 20 million with like minimal investment. It's just absolutely crazy. Now, Explosive Arrow Mines was a very niche playstyle, and that got nerfed, and self-casting this is unchanged. But yeah, Ballista's gonna... I absolutely recommend practicing Explosive Arrow Elementalist, because this is probably going to be the strongest league starter of 3.17. I even think that this change may be reverted before the patch goes live from how strong it is. Freezing Pulse is a bit of a controversial one, so it's losing its threshold jewel, and that's kind of a big deal, especially for the self-cast version. Now, a lot of people pointed out you can use Pinpoint for this. I think Pinpoint with this kind of has the problem that you can't get the extra +1 intensity on the tree if you're taking Pinpoint, because then once you get to full stacks, you are going to have 0 projectiles. You're going to have to source projectiles from other sources, and I don't like having to do that on Freezing Pulse. I think this change was very short-sighted. Now, extra projectiles are really hard to get in PoE, and the reason for that is because there exists spells such as Forbidden Rites, Blazing Salvos, Ice Spear. Now, the way these spells work is that additional projectiles basically can all hit at the same time, and, can shotgun, as they call it. And so adding additional projectiles are adding additional instances of damage, but there are also a lot of skills, such as Freezing Pulse, where additional projectiles only increase the AoE. There's no way to increase the damage of this skill by scaling projectiles, which is why it was kind of nice that it had the threshold jewel that gave it these free extra projectiles. That wasn't increasing its damage, it was just increasing its coverage, which was kind of important for a skill like this. It kind of has a small hitbox. It's got some usability issues if you don't really include this, and this is going to be really clunky even with like the base pinpoint support with 3 intensity, where you're in a boss fight and the boss spawns adds. You only have 1 projectile, you're firing it at the boss, you can't kill the adds, and if you are attack moving, you're constantly going to be at almost max intensity, so you're going to have 2 projectiles sometimes, and if, it could be the case, I haven't played Self-Cast Freezing Pulse in a while, but it could be the case that if you target the cursor too far away from your character and at the boss, that your 2 projectiles can go forward and split and basically not hit the boss. It's going to depend on hitboxes and a bunch of other stuff like that. Oh wait, no, the cursor has to be close to your character, sorry, for the projectiles to split. So basically, when you're targeting a boss and attack moving with a pinpoint freezing pulse without the threshold jewels now, you are going to have to target directly onto the boss. You can't just keep the cursor slightly in front of your character, otherwise it will split the 2 projectiles that you're about to shoot into like opposite into directions that aren't where the boss is. Yeah, I'm just really not a fan of this. Now, the totem playstyle does have arena splinters, so it's kind of worth keeping that in mind. I don't think that freezing pulse is really being nerfed for totems at all. I did initially think that, but once I crunched the numbers, you see totems are getting an 8% buff, and if you go back and look at my freezing pulse guide from a couple of weeks ago, we were already using arena splinters instead of first snow, so that we had the ability to swap between freezing pulse and ice spear, right? So yeah, I think that's pretty good. Now, some of the other ways of playing this style are also being buffed, so like cast on crit, mine, spellslinger, all receiving around 15% buffs. Traps and Poet's Pen pretty much unchanged. So Spark is gaining a 50% buff, but the Threshold Jewel is no longer providing additional projectiles or giving it a duration penalty. Spark is gaining 1 additional base projectile. I suspect we may see some Spark builds that just run Pinpoint to make up for the lost projectiles, and they're just going to maybe play Frontal Spark where they're casting Spark in front of them. I know a lot of people have been looking forward to the day where this sort of comes back. A lot of people have been felt like they are pressured into playing the Threshold Jewel because it adds the extra projectiles, so maybe this is a good thing. I don't have enough experience with Spark to say definitively, but, you know, I have spoken to some people and I've gotten mixed feedback. So some people say this is, like, a pretty big nerf. Other people are saying this could be a buff. We'll have to wait and see. Arc received a very large buff of about 40% when self-cast. If you're playing it in a dual 6-link with an additional 6-link Orb of Storms to complement your arc damage, on a single target in a boss setting where the arc has 7 chains left, this is about 47% more damage, which is pretty crazy. Now, it's lost 8% damage with totems, it's lost, 16% with Mjolnir and Poet's Pen. The traps plus multi-trap is losing 18%, Spellslinger is losing 4%, Mines losing 3%, Awaken Cast and Crit minus 1.5%, and Ignite plus 1%. Going further, I'm not going to list every single trigger, I'll just talk about the major ones and then tell you that everything else pretty much lost or gained damage. Now, Orb of Storms received a massive self-cast buff of 64%. It received some other changes as well that's probably worth looking into, like it got its duration buffed, the targeting was slightly improved and all that. But yeah, I think Orb of Storms is going to be a serious contender for like additional supplementary single target damage when you are playing lightning skills and self-cast lightning skills. So this is going to be a big one. Obviously, I didn't list any other triggers since I don't really think it's appropriate to play Orb of Storms without just doing the self-cast setup. Bladefall is gaining 45% additional damage when self-cast, Poet's Pen and Traps are losing about 15%, and pretty much every other way of using this ability is unchanged. Blazing Salvo, another one that's getting a very big self-cast buff of 49%. The Traps and the Poet's Pen version are losing around 11 and 12%, everything else is roughly unchanged, gaining only a few percent or losing a few percent. Crackling Lance is gaining 44% damage when self-cast. The non-self-cast playstyles aren't really worth playing since you're losing out on the inherent damage bonus. I am suspecting that perhaps this buff might make Crackling Lance worth playing. We have seen GGG constantly buff this skill. They released it in a very underpowered state, and everyone was really upset about that because it looked like a really cool skill. I think this is really going to push it into the territory of being viable. Expect to see a lot of people playing this next patch, but, the jury's still out on whether this is actually good. Fireball's another one where most of the other changes aren't really important, but self-cast is gaining 51% additional damage. Now, this is the hit-based self-cast version, right? The Ignite-based version is only gaining 9%, but it's still a buff, right? A lot of other Ignite skills are getting nerfed. This is receiving a small buff, so it's kind of noteworthy, and a lot of people used to play Ignite Fireball. Maybe we'll see more of that again in the future, but I could also see hit-based Fireball coming back with this change. Then again, the Hydrosphere nerf may stop that from being the case, but we'll have to wait and see. Firestorm is a skill that's been pretty lackluster since they changed it from its old functionality. They tried to change it into like a Meteor type playstyle, but it hasn't quite hit the mark. I don't know if this is going to be enough to get it there. It's gaining plus 44% on self-cast. Now, this could be enough, right? This actually could be enough. It's possible you'll see Elementalist and Inquisitors playing self-cast hit-based Firestorm. It very much is a possibility, but I'm not sure. I've done some like preliminary testing on this, and in some cases on budget gear, it kind of feels possible. But we're also gonna have to kind of see the content that comes out next patch. I don't want to do too much testing and waste too much time on this because this still has a lot of things holding it back, such as like a clunky cast time, and the way that gaining too much cast speed kind of defeats the purpose of having the Firestorms. I guess you can focus on the medial part of the skill with the alt quality version of the gem, but then it's not really a league starter anymore. And if you are playing this in a league starter scenario, I'm not sure that you want to play this at all, since it has all of the like bad quality of life issues. It was mostly unchanged for pretty much everything else except self-cast. Maybe worth noting, traps and Poet's Pen lost 15 and 13% each, but yeah, other than that, this didn't really see many other changes except for self-cast. Flame Surge is receiving another hefty buff. All the other trigger styles aren't really worth talking about. I'm not sure Flame Surge needed a buff. It's seeing plenty of play as a way to supplement your ignite damage currently, where it's adding the burning ground effect. I kind of hope that buffing the self-cast version doesn't put it in a position where the two methods of using it have to compete in terms of balance. I hope that doesn't be the case, and the way it's being balanced at the moment, it maybe seems that that doesn't have to be the case. Like, we can just have hit-based Flame Surge and then also Flame Surge as a utility for Ignite builds. That could be pretty cool. I personally have no interest in playing this, but I've heard some people that are, so some people are going to be pretty happy about this change. Glacial Cascade is another spell following the format where basically the self-cast is getting a really nice buff of 45%, and then the Poet's Pen and Trap version of this skill is getting nerfed by around 15%, and everything else is more or less unchanged. Now, I do think this is a bit of a shame. There were some people that used to play like GC Mines and GC Traps and stuff in the past. Not really much love for those people, but I think that's okay too. GC is probably going to get hurt by the Unleash nerfs. Now, I forgot to mention the Unleash penalty that's happening soon. So Unleash is also being nerfed, and if you were playing GC with Unleash, which was kind of like a niche playstyle, I played it a couple of leagues ago when someone else showed me. If you built enough damage into the character, you could just burst the boss down. Now, I don't know if that's still being used on the current version of Glacial Cascade, but yeah, basically, just regularly self-casting this is going to be buffed, and I think that's cool. Honestly, I couldn't be bothered calculating Divine Ire for like various levels of charge, so I've only done it at full charge, which I think is like 20 stacks. The self-cast version of Divine Ire is getting an additional 60% damage if you let it go when it's fully charged. Totems are gaining 5% more damage, and all the other playstyles I don't think are really relevant since it's channeled, and I don't think like you can trigger it at all. So this is kind of nice. There's not really much to say here. I think Divine Ire still has like a lot of issues. A spell that you need to like stand still and cast for as long as you do with Divine Ire just doesn't fit as much into the modern version of the game. I think it may need to have been buffed a little harder to see it played. Damage is never really an issue with this skill. The fact that you need to basically stun yourself for a period of time in order to get damage out is kind of the problem, and it's going to need to like be significantly overbuffed in order for people to accept that penalty, I think. But yeah, otherwise, I still think this is a step in the right direction. Divine Ire totems was something that people enjoyed playing as well, so I guess we'll see maybe more of that. But yeah, time will tell. Self-cast Flame Blast is getting a whopping 84% increase to damage, but this is only to hit-based Flame Blast. Now, a lot of Flame Blast is played as Ignite nowadays. That's getting 32% additional damage. Totems are gaining 21% additional damage, and if you play Ignite Totems, then you're only gaining 4% damage, which is kind of underwhelming. I have seen a lot of people try various, permutations of these ways of attaining Flame Blast damage. I'll be interested to see what ends up happening from this, but I kind of suspect Flame Blast still isn't going to see play, much for the same reason Divine Ire doesn't see play, that these skills that just require you to like hold yourself in the same spot, they don't fit into the modern version of the game very well. The modern version of the game is very fast-paced. It requires you to like constantly stay moving in a lot of cases. I just don't think this has much of a place there, and even with totems, I still think this isn't going to be that popular. I think the Soul Mantle nerf in particular is going to scare a lot of people off, even though I can numerically, I can explain to you that mathematically the totem playstyle is being buffed for some skills. A lot of people still aren't going to touch totems just because they saw that Soul Mantle is losing +1 totem, and like that's a big deal for a lot of people on, I guess, an emotional level. Selfcast Ice Nova is gaining a whopping 48% buff. Now, with Poet's Pen and when triggered by Cosprey's Malice, it's losing 11% damage. Not really surprising, and I don't know that it needed this. I guess, like, Cosprey's and Poet's Pen are just getting over-nerfed because of the existence of the Squire, I presume. And Awakened Custom Crit is getting 5% extra damage on this. I don't think that really matters. Now, the thing that I think is worth talking about is that Ice Nova deals a really nice chunk of damage already, and if you were self-casting it and using, like, the Pledge of Hands trick with Frostbolts, then you're basically, I think, getting out 8 Ice Novas per cast, and you don't have to pay the Spell Echo and Greater Spell Echo cast time penalties that are normally associated with these skills, because when Ice Nova repeats from Frostbolt projectiles, it just does it automatically. You don't have to invest that cast time. So I think we may see like a Ice Nova Pledge of Hands meta eventually. It just depends on whether a lot of people feel like they want to play this sort of playstyle. But it has been popular in the past, and I think there's definitely a lot of room for it to experience a bit of a comeback. This is going to be really strong, presumably, and there are a lot of ascendancies that are well equipped to handle this. And I know a lot of people were playing this as a raider in the past. I don't think that's going to be the case anymore. There are definitely like a lot of other better ascendancies nowadays to pull this off on, so keep an eye out for that. I think Pledge of Hands in general is going to be a more expensive item this league with the buff to self-casting, but yeah, you know, as I've said with pretty much every other skill, we're going to have to wait and see. I've never played Incinerate, I've never seen Incinerate being played, but it is being buffed by 48% with self-cast and losing 3% totem damage. I don't think this really matters to absolutely anyone at all. Like with a bunch of the earlier spells, Purifying Flame is gaining a massive 50% self-cast buff, but it's not really being changed for a lot of the other playstyles. Rolling Magma, or the artist formerly known as Magma Orb, is gaining a 50% buff to self-cast, and all the other playstyles aren't really gaining any significant bonuses or like losing any significant amount of damage. I didn't copy-paste the text. As you can see, it's got like all the same multipliers as the previous skill, that being Purifying Flame, just how GGG happened to balance it, and how the rounding worked out. Nothing super interesting to say with Shock Nova. It's gaining additional 45% damage on self-cast, and the other ways of playing it aren't really receiving notable bonuses or penalties. I have seen some people hyping this up, but it's way too soon to tell. Stormburst is gaining a 47% damage increase, and this is probably going to keep the 7 or 8 Stormburst players in the world pretty happy. Similar deal, Stormcore is gaining 48% more damage. I don't really know that this is a big deal at all. I think the only time I've seen Stormcore played recently was with Val Stormcore, which I don't believe off the top of my head is receiving any changes. This skill has so many quality of life and usability issues. I just don't really see this buff making a big difference. I think damage isn't the problem with this skill, but maybe it turns out this damage increase makes it a little more playable. We'll see. Frostbolt is gaining a very large damage increase of 64%. I don't really think any of the other trigger playstyles are worth talking about. The thing that does need to be sort of mentioned is that whilst these increases do seem nice, Frostbolt still has a lot of problems. You know, like it doesn't travel very fast. When you use it in a map, typically, like, it doesn't have like great clear speed and that sort of stuff. I don't know that buffs like this are going to help Frostbolt see play, since, you know, like with a lot of the skills we talked about, there are usability issues that are preventing people from playing this skill. But then again, 64% might be the thing that sort of pushes it over the edge. It does have some really nice base damage now, and I guess for like maybe hardcore players, people who are happier to endure the slower playstyle, maybe they will be okay with this. Maybe they will, actually make this build work, but, as with everything, we'll have to wait and see. To pretty much all the same damage increases and reductions on Ethereal Knives, Selfcast is gaining a 50% damage bonus. The Threshold Jewel is no longer adding extra projectiles. It's just providing the Nova behavior, but Ethereal Knives is getting 3 extra base projectiles. Now, this doesn't really matter as much for Ethereal Knives, since this is just going to increase coverage and the consistency of the damage that you deal to targets in front of you in the frontal cone that Ethereal Knives casts. Their projectiles don't shotgun, or additional projectiles won't equate to additional damage onto a single target the way Spark does. So I'm not sure what to really make of this. It could be fun playing, that frontal Ethereal Knives playstyle and not having to rely on the Nova. But this is another one of those things where we're just going to have to wait and see. I know I said that on pretty much every skill, but that is very much the nature of all these changes. We're really just going to have to actually play real content with these characters and play around with our gems and our in-game, passive trees and stuff like that, and sort of see how they all feel compared to each other. This is going to require a lot of testing to get a good feel of how these skills actually play out in, in an actual real setting when you're doing content that is challenging to you and stuff like that. This could be really good. Like, we could just have a playstyle where, your character's going to throw out Ethereal Knives in front of you, and it's going to deal a significant amount of damage, and that's how you play your character. I don't know, but we'll see. Burning Arrow was changed in a way that concerns some people. Now, self-casting it, doing the hit-based Burning Arrow with non-ignite is giving you 9% extra damage, and ignite is gaining around 1% extra damage, although that value is rounded up. More or less, you basically just don't have to worry about Burning Arrow. I think it was inheriting a larger mana cost and a better casting animation, but that's about it. It hasn't really changed that much. I don't think Burning Arrow is going to come back into the meta or anything. Like, the changes it's receiving aren't very significant, and they may be construed as nerfs overall because of the mana cost thing. Hit-based Penance Brand is still hot garbage until you invest, multiple mirrors into it, but Ignite-based Penance Brand is gaining 46% additional damage, I believe, at max stacks. This could be good. I don't know. It's been a very long time since I toyed around with Ignite-based Penance Brand, and I don't know a lot of people that are really into this playstyle. The delayed... multiple types of delayed damage on top of each other. I don't know that it goes down too well, and if you have the currency to invest in this sort of thing, there are better Ignite builds to go with. But, I think buffs are a good thing, especially for skills that aren't seeing a lot of play. Okay, so Explosive Concoction is being buffed, but I don't really know by how much it's being buffed. The values are kind of hard to work out, and getting you exact amounts would require sitting down and crunching some numbers that, honestly, I couldn't be bothered doing. I would rather just wait and see for Explosive Concoction to end up being good and for people to play it, and then we can invest time into theory crafting for it. But when this skill came out, it was hot garbage, and I think GGG tried to buff it a little bit, and it was still hot garbage, and then they released Poisonous Concoction, which was 10 times better, and was actually a playable skill. In fact, it was quite good. So this, it's receiving weird buffs to a bunch of things. It's going to depend on how people end up playing it and building it and all that sort of thing, so it's hard to give you an exact, number in terms of how much it's being buffed by, but as with everything else, guys, repeat after me, we'll wait and see. So these last 4 slides are kind of depressing. Not much really changes on them. These are just the sort of new skills that have been added over the last few patches that didn't receive any buffs today, so they inherited all the nerfs to all the various trigger playstyles. So, as you can see with Eye of Winter, the self-cast damage on this is unchanged. So if you're self-casting Eye of Winter, as I did a couple of patches ago on the Bad to the Brotherhood Assassin, still going to be pretty good, right? But if you're playing it with Cosprey's or Poet's Pen, you lose 40% damage. If you're playing it with Traps, you lose 41% damage. If you're spell slinging Eye of Winter, minus 31% damage. If you're playing it with Mines, minus 31% damage. Awaken Cast on Crit, minus 30% damage. And Totem Eye of Winter, something I actually did play in the past, minus 34% damage. I think this is really sad. Eye of Winter Totems did not need a 34% nerf. Spellslinger Eye of Winter didn't need a 31% nerf, but I understand it, right? There has to be some collateral damage, and that's totally understandable. The Mine and Trap version of Eye of Winter probably did need a nerf. There were, I think, Poet's Pen and Cosprey's versions that people theory crafting that might have been strong. I didn't really see them for myself, so I can't comment on it. So some of these things did need nerfs, and overall, a lot of this is just collateral damage for the changes that were made today. Now, these changes made a lot of skills playable, probably. So I'd say it's probably worth it for the skills I'm about to show you to get nerfed. There are only 4 that I could think of that I really cared about. I mean, there are probably more than just 4, but I think these are the 4 that are probably on people's radars and that people actually give a damn about. So yeah, it's Eye of Winter, and then Forbidden Right's pretty much gaining all of the same nerfs since this skill itself was untouched. Reap, and then Exsanguinate. Now, the Exsanguinate nerf may actually be felt a little. It's played with Seismic Trap, and Seismic Trap is being nerfed, so Fizz Trapper may just be out of the meta after this. The Reap nerfs, I think, are kind of a little unwarranted. Reap Selfcast is also going to get hit by the Unleash nerf. No, I didn't really mention the Unleash nerf in any of these videos, but it's coming. I probably should have included it. I did most of the videos, all the slides, and remembered about the Unleash nerf right at the end. kind of couldn't be bothered redoing all my work, especially since it's like 2 in the morning, and I was supposed to be asleep, you know, like a bunch of hours ago. So yeah, Reap, Exsanguinate, Forbidden Rant, and Eye of Winter, they are getting destroyed if you are not self-casting them, so that is very unfortunate, but it's a change I accept. You know, it had to happen, right? Like, we are moving Path of Exile in a good direction going forward, and maybe these skills can see some love in the future when GGG realizes that we aren't playing much of them. Or, you know, I think the biggest one for, like, Eye of Winter would be to lower its cast time. It's got, like, the most ridiculous 0.8 base cast time. That probably could see some changing, but yeah, otherwise, none of this is really a big deal. You know, we've covered a lot of skills that just got buffs people have been asking for literally years. I started playing in 3.7, and I can remember, even back in 3.7, a lot of these skills, people wanted self-casting buffs for these skills, so we finally got them. A lot of skills are probably going to be playable. I'm okay with, like, 3 or 4 skills kind of getting nerfs to playstyles that were popular for them. It's not the end of the world. We'll just wait and see how the meta shakes up. But yeah, like, if the meta shakes up significantly and we have a bunch of new skills to play going forward on League Start and stuff like that, I think it's going to be worth it. I really do. It is sad to say goodbye to new skills so soon, but, you know, you have to weigh it up at the end of the day. I do apologize for you having to sit through a bunch of me saying we'll have to wait and see on pretty much every slide. I didn't know a better format to do this for. I think the main thing is that at least you have the slides. You can sort of skim through the video on your own and just pick out the slides you want and just read off it. You don't really need to pay attention to what I'm saying. My commentary is kind of irrelevant on this one. I was going to provide the spreadsheet where I got all this actual data from. Like, I put together my own spreadsheet and then populated it for each playstyle. Unfortunately, it's kind of messy as hell, and I don't really feel like fixing it up at 2 in the morning just so I can show it off to, like, 5 people that maybe care about it. But yeah, basically all the important information is contained in these slides. If people really want the slides, maybe I'll do something about that and get people a copy, but I think just use the video for now. If you like this video, give me a like, comment, and subscribe. I'm going to go to bed now, and then when I wake up, we're going to do this all over again for whatever the hell GGG are previewing in the morning. So I will catch you guys then.